Hello, thanks for joining today. I'm just here to give a little update for any night owls over in the US about the Trump virus, namely the likely coronavirus 19 pandemic that will occur in the United States as a consequence of Trump's administration asking health officials to go to the disembarking of Americans taken off the Diamond Princess, a cruise ship where a lot of people got infected with the coronavirus, or COVID-19 as it's known, and allowed them to greet those disembarking potentially infected passengers without any protective clothing or health training measures. So it's quite likely now that the COVID-19 virus is circulating in American communities without people's knowledge or awareness. Some of the CDC testing kits have had a faulty component, and a lot of places just aren't doing tests for the virus. So let's have a look at some of the cuts that the Trump administration has made to healthcare and to pandemic response units. So I'm just going to share the screen here. Let me know if that's easy for you guys to see or not, but in any case, I'll read some of what I can see. So I'm having a look at how the Trump administration shut down the entire Global Health Security Unit of the National Security Council, eliminated the US government's $30 million Complex Crises Fund, and also reduced national health spending by $15 billion. So let's go to the source that this information is taken from, which is a Business Insider article. So let's see, are you getting to see the same thing that I am? I hope so. So it's published on the 25th of February. Trump spent the last 2 years slashing the government agencies responsible for handling the coronavirus outbreak. He insisted on Tuesday that the coronavirus, known as COVID-19, is under control because China is working very hard to contain its spread. Let me just check to make sure that you can see what I see. No, you can't. All right, we'll change it so that the article is on screen as well as I am, so you can also reference my source materials yourself. So let's just scroll up again. This is Business Insider. 2 years spent by the Trump administration slashing the government agencies responsible for handling the virus outbreak. So yes, Trump pretended in a news conference that it was the Democratic debate which had sent stock markets spiraling downwards. Sometimes the lies from the Trump administration are so blatant, they might even be able to permeate through the thick layer of delusion and denial that so many people who support him or ignore his egregious criminal misconduct and corrupt behavior can sometimes do. This might get through to them. The economy is going to tank, and Trump helped slash the agencies responsible for trying to contain such a pandemic. A lot of these agencies and funding were established in the wake of the Ebola virus. Yes. All right, so let's have a look. Trump administration has spent several years dismantling the very government programs responsible for battling a global health crisis. Trump said China is working very, very hard. I have spoken to President Xi, and they are working very hard. If you know anything about him, I think he will be in pretty good shape. They have had a rough patch, but now it looks like they are getting it more and more under control. So there are at least 36 confirmed cases in the US, but that's obviously going to rise significantly given what we now know happened with the DHHS. That is to say, the whistleblower who's alerted us to the fact that government officials were sent to greet disembarking or repatriated American cruise ship passengers from the Diamond Princess without protective clothing or having been taught the precautions necessary to prevent spread of the highly infectious disease. So Trump was also lying to the public at a press conference about the mortality rate associated with the flu. So the flu has a mortality rate of approximately 0.1, whereas the fatality rate associated with the coronavirus is 2%. So millions of Americans are likely to die in the advent of the coronavirus taking hold around the nation, which it's likely to because of the misconduct, the corruption, and the pseudo-populism of the Trump administration. So you often see that in Republican-governed states, such as Indiana, when Mike Pence was governor, outbreaks occur because their approach to healthcare is more punitive, in line with a biblical-orientated worldview where people should be punished for misbehavior rather than taking an empirically based, science-backed approach to controlling disease. Yes, a market correction was needed. I'll agree with the commentator who said that, because the market was giddy with glee that an uninhibited corruption pro-business person was in power. Business often enjoys not having any regulations, and Trump certainly isn't in favor of regulating businesses. But one of the reasons that is because he likes to do the crimes. And the stock market and nations generally need corruption to be minimized in order to have the kind of stable conditions that actually favor business investment over the long term. So you'll notice that business investment has fallen under Trump, and for that specific reason. Even though it makes the stock market go up initially, a correction was due because people, if they pay attention for a few minutes, can see that Trump is corrupt. So yes, somebody's updating me that about 60 cases in the US now, and we know about the contagion rates of this problem. So we've got a couple of trolls because I did use the hashtag Trump virus. Hopefully it helps people engage with the issue, but yes, it does bring either real Trump supporters or paid trolls onto this account. So feel free to ignore them. But yes, the stock market has been buoyed by the way Trump and the GOP are running the economy. That is to say, a deficit economy with huge sums being borrowed in order to create a sort of sugar high for industry that hasn't really worked because business investment hasn't increased as it should have in line with that level of deficit. So the amount of debt that Trump is accruing has not paid off in terms of a proportionate growth rate. Yes, we do have instances of the disease in Australia, coronavirus, and we also have an incompetent conservative government in Australia as well. So conservatives often talk the talk about containment, but most of their measures often involve just placating people's racist impulses. So some of them can be helpful in terms of limiting travel from certain areas, but at the same time, it's window dressing if you don't have a competent plan to manage the illness in other ways, if you don't have the right levels of investment in health infrastructure, in research, etc. The government in Australia gave $2 million to researchers to work on the coronavirus, which is approximately a tenth of the amount of money they gave to a football club in a conservative parliamentarian's district to improve the car park there. Oh no, Trump's significantly inflated American debt. So we should bring some figures up rather than let trolls spout Russian propaganda here. Yes, Obama increased the debt for a stimulatory program, but if you look at figures, and we can bring some figures up. All right, so let's look at some figures of actual Democratic versus Republican growth rates. I can bring that up for you. Wow, in 2018, I'm just going to stop and mention this, the CDC cut 80% of its efforts to prevent global disease outbreaks because it was running out of money. The department went from working in 49 countries to just 10. I'd also like to note that 60 emergency disease centers were established and funded after the Ebola outbreaks, and 50 of those centers were defunded recently as a consequence of the Trump administration's actions. So Trump is pretending that the Democrats are overly blaming Trump. And it's true that it does fit very easily into our established narrative of blaming Trump, but that's backed by reality. Trump is incompetent, and the Republicans are pseudo-populists who like to hurt people in order to reduce their ability to think rationally, respond rationally to crises, and instead vote for the person who they're repeatedly told is the enemy, namely Democrats, women who get abortions, who else is the enemy? Oh, migrants, people from Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. That type of glee at a shared identified enemy is what misled the German population in that critical period of history a lot of us are familiar with. But it's not effective at responding to crises, and it's not helpful. I'd also like to note that Mike Pence, who's been put in charge of the United States response to coronavirus, was seen on camera wiping his nose with his hand and then shaking multitudes of people's hands at the press conference. And in fact, we can watch footage of that right now. I'll just move this article away and share Twitter, where there's footage of Mike Pence wiping his nose with his hands. So let's just have a little look at that. There's Mike Pence wiping his nose with his hand, and the footage of him shaking people's hands continues later. But you can believe it. Wiped his nose with his hands and then shared footage of that. Okay. So the Trump virus, yes, somebody's observing that we will likely be stuck with Trump if people keep supporting Bernie Sanders. Yes, but take heart from the fact that Biden is having a bounce. And if we can convince people to at least stop supporting Elizabeth Warren, because Bernie Sanders supporters are not reasonable at this stage anymore. Like Trumpism, they've fallen under the spell of identifying enemies and then raging against them, which is a great uplifting feeling if you're part of that team that have gone, haha, I denounce the enemy. It is capitalism. I will hear no word in favor of capitalism. It is all evil, and we must have something that is different to capitalism. If you look around at communism in a serious way, you're unlikely to think that it's a useful way to promote health and well-being of people, considering the millions of people that have died under communist rule. But, I'd better go in a second. So yes, Bernie Sanders supporters, I've agreed with you that a lot of his most fervent supporters are cultish, but Elizabeth Warren supporters, I think, if more evidence comes forward that she is not the unifying candidate that they think she is, that whilst her proposals have a lot of appeal because America yearns, well, educated Americans often yearn for a shift back to the left. They can see America's shifted to the right. What they haven't accepted is that's not because presidential candidates have been insufficiently progressive. It's because American Democrats have been too lazy, too complacent to vote at midterm elections. So they've been too complacent after electing a Democratic president. And unlike Republicans who often just keep going out there in a energized way to protect their own property rights from what they fear as being socialists and therefore turn out to every election, Dems get a president, think job done, and don't turn out to midterms. Then Republicans get to control various branches of Congress or levels of Congress, and progressive legislation doesn't get passed. Legislation for the public good is stultified and compromised and modified so that it's not helpful and it doesn't extend the benefits of universal health care as broadly as it needs to, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, a Biden-Harris ticket would be perfect because a moderate can deliver on pro-public policies, provided Democrats remember to support their president, their Democratic candidate president, by also attending midterm elections. So really, the Americans who support Warren just need to reconcile their own sadness and guilt and process all those feelings from the 2016 unfair loss of Hillary Clinton when she won the popular vote. Process your feelings, move through to a pragmatic stage where you can accept that Biden has a support of a lot of people, has more credibility with Black voters than Elizabeth Warren does, and is a good candidate to unify around, particularly if he brings with him Kamala Harris as a vice presidential ticket running mate. Yes, I'm very aware that Trump supporters have been switching parties and voting for Bernie to inflate Bernie's appearance as a viable candidate, but he's not a viable candidate. He would lose the Dem majority in the House and the hope for a Democratic majority in the Senate. Bernie's a walking nightmare in terms of Dem hopes for gaining control over the various branches of government. Yes, Biden would be an infinitely superior president to the corrupt criminal currently occupying the White House, having been assisted by Saudi Arabia and Russia and Israel, etc., as well as the Koch brothers and all of the corrupt conservatives who have conspired behind the scenes to effectively steal American democracy, and who have also used legal pathways to buy Supreme Court tickets, and helped get a balance of power on the Supreme Court that allowed the Citizens United decision to be made in 2010, which allowed masses of money to flow from corporations to candidates, thus taking power away from workers and people and propelling America towards dysfunction and people with low wages who can't pay their bills, who are dependent on government handouts. So I need to go, but thanks so much for listening today. If you know any Elizabeth Warren supporters, try to gently talk them down from the ledge, or at least just suggest to them that Biden has good viability in swing states and that America is, after all, evolving away from its Puritanical origins. It was founded by Puritans in terms of its status as a initially white immigrant nation. Yes, I'm socialism, democratic socialism is much more preferable to the liberal democracy, the vulture capitalism afflicting a lot of people in the US. But at the same time, communism itself does result in the death of millions upon millions of people. And if you had lived in Ukraine and been related to any of the millions who died under the Stalin instigated man-made famine, the Holodomor, or if you'd lived in China where approximately 30 million died as a consequence of the famines there, I'm sure you'd agree that communism itself is not good. And moderated, America has a socialized infrastructure system, which has led to its prosperity and to the success of its business ventures. So American capitalism is underpinned by socialized infrastructure, the publicly funded education systems, which mean you don't just have to buy healthcare, you don't just have to buy education, which means the benefits of education and healthcare were more broadly distributed, allowing for a healthier, better educated workforce with roads to travel on, goods to be distributed on, etc. Well, if you benefited from the totalitarian communism in Yugoslavia, then that's nice, but you would need to acknowledge that many people die under communism, and if you didn't, good for you. Yes. So Alexander says, under totalitarian communism in Yugoslavia, it was bad, but better than this, still trust you. I'm not going to trust you on that, just because I need people to know that communism is dangerous so they stop supporting Bernie Sanders. And I'm sure you'll agree that different people have different experiences under different regimes. So the people who suffered under totalitarianism in Yugoslavia, who didn't live to tell the tale, aren't here having this conversation with me now, but you survived it, so you have survivor bias. It wasn't so bad, I survived. So yes, lots of people die each year as a consequence of overly vulture capitalism in America, where people without political power are left to contend with inadequate wages that lead to not being able to afford heating or food or shelter, etc., which leads to death. True. Yes. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. Take care, everyone, and hope to talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye. Please share this broadcast if you found it interesting. And thanks, Harvested Beats. I will put up my, do I have a Patreon? I have a Patreon account, and some people who are my Patreons, thank you so much to you all. And your support's very appreciated. And if you have any tips on how to best improve or deliver my broadcast, your tips are welcome. Thanks, everybody. Bye. End broadcast.